Audio Jungle. Audio Jungle. Audio Jungle. Okay, hello everyone. Welcome to our 8th International Congress of Young Economics, and thank you for joining us. I'm Cemre Yoldaş from the University of Leicester, and I'll be modeling this session on the second day of the Congress. Our guest speaker in this session will be Associate Professor Murat Koyuncu from Bogazici University. He will present his article From Elected to Appointed, the Economic Consequences of Local Authorizations Takeovers. So, and before starting, I would give you some detail about our question season. We are all welcoming the all questions during presentation time, but we started give the all question when the presentation will be done. So, okay, so I would like to say thank you. Thank you, Murat, Professor Murat. So we are really happy for talk to you today. So when you're ready, you can start. It's your time.
Okay, thank you very much. First of all, thanks for the invitation and thanks for organizing this conference. I think it's a great idea for the young economists to come together and share their ideas and work. I'm really happy to be here. So today I will be presenting this joint paper with my also young co-authors who used to be our graduate students at Bogazici, but now they are in their own tenure track jobs at Sabancı and Koç, Serkant and Mustafa. So this has been in the making for some time now. I think we started maybe 3 years ago, maybe more, and it involves a heavy data acquisition period as well that took us more than 6 months perhaps, so I will also talk about that. I think one of the joys of working with young co-authors is to be able to delve into such tremendous tasks and get out of them successfully. So what we look at is, as the title says, is about appointments or sacking of the elected officials and the appointments in place of them in the Turkish setting. And this is, of course, going to be kind of a global phenomenon. It looks like there's a tendency towards more authoritarianism across the globe. And we think that the part of the erosion of democratic values, norms, and institutions are also going to be linked to or be showing us some effects on the public finance side. So we will be looking at that part. But I think this is it's not going to be a surprise to say that we have seen similar episodes in Russia and China. In terms of how the central governments removed the locally elected officials and appointed their own representatives instead. And we are currently seeing that in a manner in the Turkish setting currently. I won't go into the details of that for obvious reasons, but this is from the previous episode of appointments in municipality settings. What we are more interested in actually is how these authoritarian moves affect the local settings or local economies in general. So that's what we'll be looking at, and the main question will be through the public procurement. That is, we'll talk about why that's important, but we want to, of course, as economists, try to understand the economic outcomes of these political moves. And we'll see that it's going to go through the rule of law. So it kind of touches upon that legal institutions or link between institutions and economic performance link as well. So why procurement? Obviously, the main thing here is that this is one of the most important functions of governments, buying goods and services from private suppliers so that they can function as a municipality or a central government. And we see that it is a huge sum, right? That is 12% of the global GDP, and it's a similar number for the Turkish setting too. It's almost 12%, and um, and that is a sum that basically is vulnerable to corruption, and it's a huge sum. So the efficiency consequences of this is going to be, I think, important to investigate for us in general. Um, but more generally, when you think about the setting we are going to talk about, is uh, relatively underdeveloped municipalities we are looking at, and that also has kind of a link between the development levels of those municipalities. Not that we are looking into that in this paper, but I think the one of the key functions of local municipalities or local governments is to be on the lookout for what their uh, what welfare of their waters are about, or how they can support them. And I think this is also related to that question as well. Now, what we do in this paper is, I think, more critically, is looking at the causal effects of these authoritarian takeovers. And I think that is where the main contribution of the paper lies, because in a way, it's not going to be, the results will not be surprising, I think, but we show them in a causal setting, so we are kind of uh, very confident in our results in what we show. But we try to also explore and suggest some mechanisms as well. Unfortunately, the mechanisms cannot be really proven with data, but we have a way to sort of rule out certain explanations versus supporting some others with some suggestive evidence. The data we look at is this administrative data set. We basically have the universe of all the contracts that the state conducts since 2011 until today. We continue to update that data set, but what we'll be looking at is, of course, a certain portion of that. And we'll be looking at this kind of political economy setting where we have elected mayors in these municipalities, but they are replaced with centrally appointed, what we call trustee mayors in the paper, and also in Turkish as well. Um, uh, and that brings more power to the central government, obviously, and more important, I think, changes the incentive structure of these governments, local governments, right? So we will try to sort of tie our results to that change in the incentive mechanism, and we'll look at two things basically through the public procurement setting. Whether there's a certain kind of abuse of law, and we show that there is, and we show that through the more economic outcomes of that abuse of law, how the prices of these contracts change, and what the value for money, meaning how efficient these public procurement contracts are, they do change. And we do this in this staggered DID setting, which is one of the most popular and common econometric techniques with similar types of data sets currently. And as such, we have the causality argument. So, quick preview before we go into the details. What we show is that these appointed officials are actually 3 times more likely to abuse a certain kind of regulation, certain kind of procurement regulation, and that's called the unforeseen events clause. I'll get into the details of that in a minute, but basically it is something that's supposed to be used for emergency settings or some extreme urgency, uh, but they use it very commonly for just any kind of contract. And as a result of that, we see the winning prices or the costs of these contracts go up by almost a quarter, and the value for money, the efficiency of these contracts, decline by almost 40%. So that is going to be the main big result of this. As you can see, these are big effects, and we although it's in a kind of limited setting, it still has an, I think, national level impact too. Beyond that, we also look at something called threshold clause, which is another possible regulation component that could be easily abused. But what we show is actually it doesn't matter whether you're appointed or elected, you abuse it the same. So that's an interesting result too. And we tie that to the idea that that is more of a opaque. It's more difficult to understand what's going on in terms of the threshold clause. I'll explain that in a minute. And we look at the mechanisms. So what we do has ties to quite a few literatures. The more recent literature on authoritarianism and weaponization of law, from political science to political economy, has been kind of expanding very quickly for obvious reasons. What we add to that contribution is, first, this data set is novel, that is universe of state contracts, but more importantly, we can bring in some causal evidence on especially on the local scale, which is not very, very common in this literature, so that we can go into the discussion of whether local accountability as a mechanism does have an impact on this. Beyond that, there is the literature on politicians' discretion, obviously, how it has been at the center of political economy literature for a long while. And we see some papers on that front from using public procurement data, but what we generally see in those papers is that they are talking about cost manipulation using the threshold clause, which is a common clause, and basically almost all governments, local or central, do somehow abuse that threshold clause too. So we can see that in the literature where there are many examples of that. But we go beyond that. As I said, our setting brings in this discussion about another regulation, another part of the regulation that's called the unforeseen event clause. And we realize that this could be a new kind of tool, especially for, I think, with this case, especially for the countries with more and more authoritarian governments. It could be one of the new tools that they use that will help them, stay in power or do get richer as a result. So what we have with this is this roadmap. I will not go into the details of the roadmap, but I will first remind you about the setting in this Turkish case. From anybody from Turkey does have the idea, but for foreign viewers too, there was a coup d'etat attempt in 2016, and that would lead to a state of emergency. And within that state of emergency, the central government started running the country by what we call emergency decree laws. So basically presidential decrees to dismantle this Gulenist network. But they also used these decree laws, emergency decrees, to target the opposition in the southeast of Turkey. These are predominantly Kurdish provinces that are mostly supporters of a pro-Kurdish opposition party. And we saw that through a change in the law. Actually, on September 1st, they amended the municipal law to allow the central government to replace the elected mayors with trustees without really a strong due course. What does that mean? That means if there's any kind of alleged terrorism crime against the mayor of the municipality, they can be directly sacked by the Ministry of Interior and replaced by a bureaucrat. These are the trustees that we'll be talking about. And they did actually replace 95 out of 102 mayors in this region, and all in the pro-Kurdish party. And it has been argued that these are all unjustified, and there are kind of legal discussions around that too. And the ones that were not sacked were basically very tiny, minor municipalities that did not bear any importance, I guess. And overall, the trustees that replaced these were bureaucrats, as I said. These are in Turkish kaymakams or vali yardımcısı. These are the district or the provincial governors or their deputies at the when we go to the metropolitan municipalities. And their main function before coming to this position would be just kind of being at the intersection of the central state and the localities. So they would be like an intermediary between the central government and what the local governments do, and sometimes coordinating more trivial events or sometimes bringing some services into the areas that are not really served by the municipalities that are at the outskirts of the municipalities generally. But their main thing is that they are career brokers. They go into the service right after their university degrees are done, and they will be elected by the officials in the Ministry of Interior. And they would be, therefore, we're arguing that they would be having an accountability towards the central government rather than the localities, because nobody really elects them locally, but they are appointed to different localities. And when they are actually appointed as the trustee mayors in this setting, they suddenly take this mayoral role on top of their previous responsibilities. So in a way, their the function of the municipality does not change. Of course, they have to bring some services to the local public, like waste management, water, to an extent, educational or cultural services, of course, infrastructure. So suddenly these responsibilities are going to be carried out by these trustees. And when the next elections come, they will leave the office. Right? So it's interesting. That is the interesting case, I think, that brings us to this sort of causal framework where they have the same power as an elected mayor. They have the responsibilities in terms of procurement, at least, as an elected mayor, but they're not going to be elected ever, right? So that's why their accountability is not towards the public, but towards the central government, in a way, to the higher ups in the bureaucracy or the central government. So that is the setting we are kind of exploiting. And for the case that we are looking at, there's again nice timing in terms of staggered adoption. So it's not a one-time thing. I mean, yes, it started in September 2016, but it did go through, it did have many waves in different regions, in different municipalities. And we do use that fact, right? So the staggered adoption, once again, is a good case for using staggered DID type of empirical strategies, and that is what we do. But that is, important to remember that it's not just a one-time thing, that it did continue throughout different months, and even in August 2018, they did have an trustee appointment in a certain municipality. So the first thing we do, of course, is to think about whether these municipalities that we kind of see as the treated ones, right? Those are the ones with appointed trustees versus the control municipalities. So who do we use as the control? We use the municipalities in the same region, in the same province, but that are run by AKP mayors. So that is the mayors in the that are aligned with the central government, basically. In such a comparison, what we try to aim is, or what we try to exploit, is the fact that AKP mayors are elected. right? So they are also aligned with this, with Ankara, let's say, just like we think the trustees are, but they are elected. So if that's the case, then the main difference between an elected mayor from AKP and a trustee mayor that is appointed by AKP basically is the fact that the second ones, the trustees do not care about elections. So electoral competition as a factor is absent for the trustees. And that's why we use this control treatment setting in our main empirical strategy and empirical part. We actually use two different methods. I'll come to that. Beyond the staggered DID, we also do regression discontinuity in time as well. But then we, of course, want to sort of convince ourselves that these are not, very different municipalities. Of course, the ones who know Turkey is going to, agree, I think, with me that these are very similar in both ethnically and in terms of the development levels. All these municipalities we are going to look at. Actually, let me kind of show the map as well to make my point. Thing is a bit further down there. Yeah. So these are the municipalities that we are looking at, except for Mersin, which is this. There was one municipality that that went through the trustee process. The rest of them is in east and southeast of Turkey, which we know to be, the most underdeveloped part of Turkey. But within there isn't a huge variation in terms of income. Of course, the metropolitan centers are richer and more developed, but in terms of the more rural municipalities, they are basically the same. And that is what we actually see in the baseline table. We try to show that these are basically the same municipalities, except for it's not statistically significant at 5%, but the some of the procurement outcomes are slightly different, but even that is not very strong statistically. We see that they are very, very similar to each other. So that's why we are kind of supporting our choice that we can use these different municipalities as controls for the empirical strategy that we are following. Okay, so where do we get the data from? So that's one thing I think useful to remember for young researchers, that you need to be on the hunt for new data from different resources. And what we do in this case is we kind of take the individual contracts from the public procurement authority's website. So they do announce these contracts. That's their function, make it public, but it's not easy to get the data from them in bulk. They don't let you do that. But even from the website, we had to write down computer codes and sit down, all the three of us in front of the computer, and get the data one by one, scraping the website. But in the end, what we have is all this information that I list here: the name of the procurement agency, when the contract is done, through which method. We basically specify the difference between auction versus negotiation, as being auctions are where anybody can make a bid, and therefore there's minimal discretion and a lot of competition, versus negotiation-based contract awarding methods, where there are like three firms that enter the negotiation phase that are determined by the contractor, by the state agency, basically. Therefore, there's a lot of discretion there. So that is one differentiation we'll be making in our results as well. And then we can also get the estimated cost, because before any contract is announced, or before any advertisement is done for procurement to come, the contractors calculate the estimated costs of such a job, right? So that is how we figure out the efficiency of our different contracting methods, because there is a winning price. I mean, the one who gets the contract will be doing that job for a certain price. But before that, the state contractor actually says, okay, this job is worth 100 liras. Then if you win it for, 120 for some reason, that's very costly, right? So the expectation is actually to have a winning price that is less than the estimated cost. Estimated costs are tend to be kind of inflated in a sense, or if there's enough competition that the firms who want to undertake this contract will be willing to do it for a lower price. So we expect to see what we call rebate values that are positive, that the winning price is less than the estimated cost. I will explain that in a minute, and that is an important piece of information for the efficiency of public procurement. Then we have the other, kind of types of purchases that is important to use as a control variable, and we have even some detailed industry code for where the purchase is made, or where the job is done, depending on if it's construction or services, etc. We do also add some controls, of course, to sort of make sure that we're not looking at results that are due to the differences across municipalities. As I just showed you, they're very similar to each other, but we still add these controls: number of business enterprises to sort of measure the economic activity level, population, because that's going to determine the need for services, or the demand for all these contracts. And finally, night lights. Instead of GDP per capita, we use the standard proxy night lights. And we, of course, have the data on all these appointments that we will be using. So what we differentiate, as I said a minute ago, is to these different modes of contract awarding, meaning that you can have this sealed bid auctions, which are, in Turkish, they're called kapalı zarf usulü ihale. You basically, any firm can enter the procurement process, and they can make a bid, and the procurement agency, or the contractor procuring agency, will be choosing the one with the lowest price. That's a very standard auction process, and that is the most competitive one, and that is the default option, right? By legally, all procuring agencies should be doing this, right? So that is why it's the default mode. But we know that there are exceptions, and there are many exceptions in the Turkish public finance legislation, actually, and they lead to these negotiation methods. These are generally going to be much faster than the sealed bid auctions, because sometimes you don't even have to advertise the job, but more importantly, you just pick who you want to see in the bidding process. You can call up, as the procuring agency, you can call 3 firms. That's enough, and then among them, pick the ones that you like the most. And for obvious reasons, this is much less transparent and much less competitive, and we show that actually in our data too, that they will lead to higher prices and higher costs for the public. And this negotiation method is where we can see the what we call the unforeseen event and threshold clauses. This is, as I said before, is the main thing that we exploit, and we show that this is a clause, a component of the legislation that is actually should be used for emergency cases, like natural disasters, pandemics, that sort of thing. You want to speed up the process, then you see what's called unforeseen event clause. And this is not something that's unique to Turkey, it's used everywhere. And as a result, of course, you can use negotiation methods. You can fasten up, speed up the process. The threshold clause is slightly different. It's about, basically making it faster for smaller procurement items, meaning as under a certain threshold, you can use this negotiation method. And again, any government you will see, or any public procurement legislation you look at, whether it's EU or US, you have a version of it. And the issue with the threshold clause is if your estimated cost is somehow close to this threshold, let's say 150,000 liras, this, or certain types it could be, then you can manipulate the estimated cost if you want to just speed up the process and use negotiation method and bring it under that amount. So this has been used a lot in the literature because it's a very common abuse, but it's really hard to prove, right? Because you need the data that I will show you in a minute for the whole set of contracts. That's how you can observe such things. So we use, therefore, with these different types of contract awarding methods, we look at the quarterly share of spending. We used to have a monthly share as well. It basically comes out to the same conclusion. Quarterly share is more robust to calendar effects, let's say. So that's why we rather have the quarterly share. And with that, we look at the contract terms, right? The contract terms is where we will see the price of the contract, estimated cost of the procurement, as I explained a minute ago, and the rebate term that I kind of explained, the difference between the estimated cost and the actual cost. And if this rebate is bigger, that is better value for the money, right? It's more efficient. If we can measure the efficiency with this, having more rebate is better for the public, that's for sure. So we do use all of these terms in different estimations. And what we want to, of course, look at is the effect of these trustees. So we use that as our main dependent variable, explanatory variable, I'm sorry. And that is at the municipality level and at the contract level, we'll have different estimation strategies. So kind of wrapping it up. So we are looking at this comparison between trustee mayors for these unforeseen event and threshold clauses to see if their discretion has actually expanded. And comparison is between the elected AKP mayors. There's a never treated control group, 87 municipalities, versus the trustee mayors. These are 94 municipalities. So they are sort of size-wise similar too. And we have this staggered adoption, and that is what we'll be using. As I said before, that staggered timing is useful for our estimation strategy too. So one more time, the sort of the geography is kind of similar. We do have results when we drop the part that is more south and west, that is the Mersin province. The results will be the same, so that's not really driving anything. So what do? We use one of the most recent methods in differences literature, local projections method. It basically gets rid of the possibility of bad controls or bad controls problem in terms of the what you compare between the treated and control groups can have when you use two-way fixed effects, which used to be the standard strategy in such settings, is that you could be comparing the treated group with the wrong control group in a sense. So local projections sort of estimates many different regressions for each regression capturing one horizon. So bring all the trustee appointments to time 0. So from time 0 to, let's say, quarter 6, you can see a 6-quarter horizon. From time 0 to quarter 5, you see a 5-quarter horizon. So for each of those horizons, you have another regression, and you basically, with this method, you bring them together. What that gives you is both the dynamic effects, in a sense, how through time this relationship between the trustee appointments and the procurement outcomes change, but also an aggregation possibility as well, right? I will show that in the results in a minute. So that's a very I think a useful strategy. When we look at any DID, we want to kind of satisfy the parallel trends assumption, but that's also, as we all know, since we don't have the counterfactual, we can't really directly test for that. But what we can test is only that the pre-trends are more or less the same. When you look at this graph on the left-hand side of the line, you see the the control and the treatment groups. They are very similar to each other, right? In terms of the levels, they're basically the same level, and there isn't a significant trend in any of them. And after the treatment, after the appointments are done, we see that they're moving perhaps both to a higher level, but they're definitely with different trends. That's what we want to prove at least. So that is our test for the parallel trends assumption. And then we also have another kind of way to show that is looking at the event study graphs. Basically what it shows for the blue parts, that is again before the appointment, you basically see that, and this is for the unforeseen event clause, meaning the clause that is reserved for emergency situations. We see that they're basically the same, right? So they are near zero, and statistically speaking that they are all zeros basically. So we know that actually before the appointments, these AKP municipalities and the DBP municipalities, the Kurdish parties municipalities, are basically the same. Same goes for the sealed bid auctions, so that now they are in the kind of the negative side of things. Still, statistically speaking, they are basically the same. So these two graphs actually also tell us that there's, at least we cannot argue that there isn't any parallel trends, right? So that is the best kind of way to put it. And then we also see on the right-hand side of these graphs, the red ones show us that, okay, they are actually different after the appointments, right? So you can see the dynamic effects. As you can see, they change a little bit, but almost all of them are statistically different than zero. And the sealed bid auctions, again, this is the competitive auction type, and they go to the negative side, meaning that the sealed bid auctions in the treatment groups decline after the appointments, right? So the end result is very clear. You reduce the sealed bid auctions and you use more of the less competitive type of contract awarding unforeseen event clause. And we will see this kind of in a regression table too in a minute, but that is the main thing we are after. And we look at the threshold clause too. They are, again, both before the appointment and after the appointment. There isn't a big difference or a statistically significant difference between the treated group and the control group. So that is the second part that I mentioned, that they are not using this differently than the elected officials. So that's an interesting result too. Now, in terms of the numbers, in terms of the figures, we look at the pooled estimates now instead of those dynamic estimates. We have kind of the weighted average of all those coefficients, and what we see is that this is the unforeseen event clause. The first columns are always without controls. We don't really need them, but of course it's always better to have controls. So with the controls too, there isn't much of a change, but it is definitely a much higher use of the unforeseen event clause. And at the expense of what? At the expense of sealed bid auctions. So we see that as well in the third and the fourth columns. We can see that they are using less sealed bid auctions, and by a significant amount. That's, basically we can read these as percentages, so that there's 24% increase in the unforeseen event clause, and that is, read the control group mean at the bottom of the table. You see that is relative to 14%, right? So from 14% an increase up to almost 40%. So that is a really tripling of the use of this control. This contracting method. And it is supposed to be something that is not frequently used. That's why 10%, 14% Even those numbers are high, I think, but we see that after the appointments, that goes up to almost 40% for the trustee municipalities. And we again see that the threshold clause, there's some difference, but it's not significant. So they are basically the same in that sense, the control and the treatment group. Now, that is our main results, but we do say that, okay, since, this is a setting where we have actually a time dimension as well, so we can actually do a before-after comparison, but in a fancy way, that is regression discontinuity in time. And this time we basically compare what happened only within the municipalities with the appointments, right? Instead of looking at the AKP mayors, we compare before the appointment versus after the appointment. That is also a very viable and very sound strategy to figure out the causality. Basically, we get the same results, right? So I don't want to spend too much time on this, but we can see them graphically. We see that how before the appointments, the level of these unforeseen event clause was around 10%. The average was, remember, 14% in the ID. So we are somewhere around that. Then suddenly jumps up to twice that, econometrically speaking, almost 3 times that. We can see that in these graphs. So RDI and, of course, the more competitive type of auctions decline at the same time. So that is what we see in our RDIT estimations too, and their threshold clauses are the same. And we can, again, do that kind of econometric estimations to see the overall effect in one number, and you can see that the numbers are basically the same. So that is showing us that within just the appointed municipalities too, there's an increase by 24%, and the decline in sealed bid auctions seems much bigger at this setting, but it is still showing us the same result qualitatively. And the threshold clause, why this is, we think that this is something that can be that is used by both sides very, very frequently, because to see that there's a manipulation, you need to see this whole graph, right? So you need to see the distribution of contracts, which we have, but obviously the public doesn't. And then you can see that there's bunching, right? So these peaks that we see right before the threshold is what we call bunching, that there's some reason that these contracts are pushed right below the threshold. Why? Because it's much easier to do these contracts with negotiation methods. So if you have a small procurement need that could be pushed down to a lower estimated cost level, you'd rather do that. And we see that in both the elected and the appointed parts. Okay, I think almost running out of time. Just to sort of underline the economic importance of this, I won't go into the mechanisms unless we have some questions about that. But when we do this with an OLS setting, so this is not, again, a causal estimate, but how much of that misuse of this unforeseen event clause leads to economic inefficiency, right? So that is what is really important for economists, in a sense, the welfare effects for the public. First of all, the prices go up relative to sealed bid auctions by this 0.2 in log terms, so we can sort of say that as 20%, and the rebate declines by almost 10%. So if I do a back of the envelope calculation, and this is again absent any general equilibrium effects, because we know that there will be some general equilibrium effects with price changes of that level. We know that we can calculate that this leads to almost $100 million over 2.5 years. This is not a huge amount when you think about the size of the Turkish economy and size of the procurement need, but this is, again, for a part of the country, a part of the economy that is relatively underdeveloped, that's relatively poor. So this is $100 million that could have been used somewhere else, right? For those municipalities, I think that is a number that makes a big difference. So that's why I think, showing it with these OLS estimates and back of the envelope calculations, I think we can say that this is a significant loss for the public. So yeah, I will once again. There's quite a bit of mechanisms in the paper. So if you want to, think about where this is coming from, and how we can say that this is about electoral accountability, you can read the paper, or we can talk about that in the question parts. Otherwise, basically, I will conclude with saying that this kind of move to which is probably going to be part of the um, new authoritarian regime's tool set for many economies, for many countries, is going to cost money and welfare for the local jurisdictions at least, and for the economies that are involved. That's going to be needing to some kind of waste. That's, I think, what we show here. Yeah, thank you. And if you have any questions, always you can just email me as well. And the paper is on my website and also on Mustafa's website, so you can always check the paper and let me know of your comments.
Yeah, and thank you so much, because when I was looking at your research, I was really excited, honestly, because it's exactly happening in Turkey, and we can see how is it going, and we can see how the result shows is exactly happened in our eyesight. We can see, we can check, and we can check your research. So it's both sides, honestly, because sometimes we can see some result, but we cannot prove it's happened in the real world or not. So, but that part is not going to like as that. So thank you for the sharing these slides. I'm really happy for talking to you about it. So we have some few questions about this, just understand more detail and understand the system, how is it going. So because I know the more knowledge is coming from your research, but unfortunately we have limited time for, we cannot talking the whole thing. So we have some few questions. One of them is about understand the economic part. Others is about the system parts, and others is about the DID, because I say the you chose these methods. So, and first part is, yeah, through what mechanism does reduced competition in procurement lower welfare in local authoritarian takeovers?
Thank you. Thanks for the interesting question as well. So we do try to get into that in the paper, but obviously the evidence for that is not going to be causal, right? Because it's about how some services or some purchases at the municipality level are done versus others. So it's again a counterfactual kind of thing, but we can argue that with our numbers, at least there's a loss of resources, in the sense that these contracts, whatever they are, because in our estimates we do control for the industry, what kind of things they are buying or contracting, and in which jurisdiction this is happening, etc. So with all those controls, we can say that if these contracts were done with the appropriate methods, this is how much cheaper they would have been, right? So that is why we think that this is, since we are comparing these elected officials, which are AKP mayors, with the trustee mayors, which are not elected, but still kind of in line with the central government in that sense, we can argue that it is about this electoral competition, right? Because we do not, only a few of these appointed trustees will go into actual politics later on. in our sample, there are 4 of them, and 2 of them do try to get elected in their hometown, which is Trabzon or whatever, outside of this region. So they do not have that concern. We know that, and they will probably move to another municipality in 2 years, 3 years, because that's how the bureaucrats appointment system works. You always move through different municipalities, so they don't care, right? In the sense that they do not need to respond to the demands of the voters at the local level. That's why I think that is the main difference between the appointed trustees and the AKP mayors, who want to be the latter ones. The AKP mayors want to be re-elected, so they do want to do their best. To an extent, there are of course constraints, limits, etc., that we can discuss, but to an extent that they want to be re-elected, they will try to do their best with the public money. It's not, we know that there are, again, many cases where even the elected officials will not care about this. Okay, that's true. But the difference in our setting is definitely that. So with that, we can argue that this loss of money, this waste, is actually something that could be used for higher welfare of the voters. We can further go and talk about the preferences of the voters, in the sense that they did elect these mayors with a certain agenda in their minds, whatever that was, and perhaps that after the appointment of the trustees, the nature of the services might have changed, right? You elected these mayors because you think they will use their spending power for education, let's say, and the appointed mayors come and they spend money on security. Well, that could also hurt welfare, because it's not what the voter wanted, right? But when we look at that, I didn't show those results in here. When we look at that, we don't see a major change in terms of which kind of contracts are done. So I think there we can say that there's not too much of that happening, at least in terms of lower welfare, because the industry of contracts changed. That's not really happening, probably. But the first one, as I said, the waste of resources, the waste of public money, I think is the main concern here.
I see. So I think we have to research every reaction for difference in different section and this section. So it's changed everything. Yeah, that's really clear. And thank you for this answer. So this question is about the design chosen for DID. So why was target DID design chosen, and why key identification assumptions support the results?
The important assumption is this parallel trends assumption. That's kind of the key assumption for all DID settings, because what you want to show is basically, before any treatment happened, these municipalities were similar. They had similar trends, right? That's what parallel trends are. They don't have to be similar in every sense. It's just a trend that we care about. Then after the appointment, one changed relative to the other, right? So that is, if the treated group changes, of course, that's what we are really after. And that's our assumption. And we do kind of show that in the paper, and I did try to show that in the slides too, that, before this appointments, they are very much similar in terms of trends. But the staggered DID is, of course, due to the fact that this policy, the appointment of trustees, was done in waves, right? So they start with the highest number of appointments in early September 16th, I think, in 2016. But after that, every month there are 5 to 6 mayors that are being sacked and trustees are appointed. That means you have different timing for different municipalities, right? So that is a very classical setting for staggered DID. And with that, we know that we can causally estimate, right? That is the critical part. The differences between these ones and the AKP mayors that are never treated, right? That are never really an option for this kind of policy. we can causally say that, okay, the results are due to this change. Of course, there can be other, some can argue that, oh, well, there are some other shocks that really happen in treated municipalities, but we don't see that, right? That we also look at violence, for example, whether as a control variable or as a subset of our results work differently in municipalities with no violence versus high violence. The results are pretty much the same. So that's why the staggered DID works well. And I mean, the results, we kind of trust them very, very, very strongly in the sense that this is, this has to be because of the appointments. And we can say that causally, again, with this strategy.
Yeah, I really understand that part is important for me. Yeah, thank you for the answer. So the other question is about the threshold. When I listening to your presentation, I realize we are talking about the unfrozen event and the threshold. So the question is about how the transparency differences between unfrozen event and threshold clauses explain trust in major behaviors gaps.
The crucial part is that the threshold clause, you can see the misuse, right? When you look at that frequency distribution graph that I showed, there's bunching right around the threshold clause value. But you can see that if and only if you have the full set of data, because you actually want to, kind of visually look at all of the contracts that are done by the municipality or by the procurer. And then you can see that, okay, there's some bunching there. With single contracts, it's really hard to say that, okay, this would have been or should have been done with a higher estimated cost, but they didn't. Well, you can go one by one, but there are really thousands of these contracts. So it is not going to be easy to generalize that. So that is the part where the public will never, ever have a good idea of what's happening in the threshold clause part. And this, I think, that kind of supports our argument that this is about what public sees versus they don't, right? The threshold clause, they cannot really identify as the waters. They cannot really figure out what's happening there. But for the unforeseen event, it's a very obvious kind of misuse in the sense that this was supposed to be used, this kind of clause was supposed to be used in a disaster, right? So, but then you use it for a daily item like buying coal for the municipality. Then you know that there's something wrong there. There's some reason at least to use that, and therefore it is much easier for voters or the public to detect that kind of misuse. And we think that that is one of the benefits of electoral competition. You don't want to, I think almost all officials want to do something corrupt. I mean, we can't really trust them in that sense, but the ones who know that they're going to be detected easily and then punished are less likely to do so, right? So that's why I think the elected mayors versus trustee mayors comparison really is important, because trustees, they only answer to the central government, and central government has a certain objective here, and it's not really about they don't care, I think, as much about the waste of money, etc. So that's why these appointed trustees has this very stark difference in terms of the unforeseen event clauses use compared to the elected mayors.
I see. Yeah. Thank you. And last question is just about the discussion. So, because we are talking about authoritarian system, and so of course we focus on the Turkey. So that's part. I just wondering your idea, honestly. So the question is, all right, how might growing centralization reshape local service delivery and democracy quality in Turkey over time?
I mean, we can only kind of do an out of the sample forecast, right? So with what we have is, it is a, a significant part of Turkey, but it's not the whole sample in the end. But it tells us that when you reduce this kind of electoral pressure on the ones who allocate these contracts, you are more likely to see a misuse of power or waste of money. And therefore, you will more likely to have a worse local service delivery, right? So these municipalities who use their money, you know, without a care about how efficient they are, they will be bound by some constraints, right? They will have budgets, and when you spend so much money on certain things, you cannot spend money on other things. So we will. It's more likely that these kinds of centralization efforts will lead to a worse public service delivery in general, the quality, which we cannot easily measure, but we can surmise, right? We can kind of forecast that because with the amount of money you have, you can, choose to do things better quality at a cheaper price if you use more transparent procurement methods, or you choose to have low quality, high price procurement, right? So that is at least what we tend to see here. I mean, we can't really measure quality for sure, but when we look at the estimated costs, they don't change as much. So quality perhaps didn't change as much in our setting, but it is likely to come down as well if you really spend too much money on high price items. And with that, of course, I think there's a more general discussion about the democracy. I mean, the local settings where you have elections at the local level that can reflect the preferences of the voters, right? So if you do centralize, if you do take away the powers of these local officials, the voters will care less as well, and they will perhaps go to the polling stations and try to cast their votes in the ballots, etc. But it's not going to be as reflective of their demands and preferences as before, right? Because they will also think that this is no use, right? I mean, we are electing these peoples. Actually, there was a stand-up comedian. He was from the Kurdish region. He says, "Why do you care so much about local elections? I mean, we elect them for 15 days anyways. I mean, who cares who is the next mayor, right?" So that's the feeling you would get in such settings. And then, of course, they feel less connected to the rest of the country. They feel less connected to the idea of democracy, I think. And that is a problem, right? That is a problem for the long run welfare of the whole country, not only for the region, and for the future generations, I think.
That's perfect. We need really all time. So thank you so much for all this information. And so I'll give to some little, just a short information about what we did so far. So today, on the second day of the Congress, we were with Associate Professor Murat Koyuncu from Bogazici University, and we reviewed his article from Elected to Appointed, the Economic Consequences of Local Authoritarian Takeovers. So thank you again for your participation and contribution. So this is really amazing, honestly. I'm really enjoying for reading your article and listening to your slides is make me really happy, and so I'm interesting, honestly. So because it's not in my area, my subject, but it's make me really interesting. So thank you for this part. So right now we exactly conclude this decision, and I hope we can see each other again. So if you would like to say something, you can talk to right now, dear Murat. So after that, we finish the decision.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me. It was great being here, and I wish you luck in the rest of the sessions and for the next set of congresses as well. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you so much. And thank you everyone for joining us, and see you other season.